We now come to Prime Minister's questions. Dr Neil Hudson.
Question number 1, Mr Speaker.
Brilliant. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I know the whole House will be appalled by the death of a young boy in Sheffield on Monday. Our hearts go out to his family and his loved ones. Knife crime blights our communities, and we redouble every step to ensure that young people are kept safe. Mr Speaker, on Monday I met other European leaders in Brussels to discuss vitally important focus on security and defence in a volatile world. I'm determined to reduce barriers to trade, making it easier for businesses to do business, and ensuring a better relationship with our European partners delivers for the British people. Mr Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others in addition to my duties in this House. I shall have further such meetings later today.
Dr Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Sadly, suicide is the biggest killer of young people under 35. Andy Airy, Tim Owen and Mike Palmer are the 3 dads walking. They each tragically lost their precious daughters, Sophie, Emily and Beth, to suicide. And they have campaigned tirelessly for suicide prevention to be included in the school curriculum in an age-appropriate way. We met with the previous Prime Minister in Downing Street, and suicide prevention was added to the RSHE curriculum guidance for consultation last year. I know the Prime Minister has met the 3 dads and supports their campaign, but sadly progress has stalled. Please, would the Prime Minister meet with me and the 3 dads so that we can finally get this over the line and ultimately save young lives?
Minister.
Well, can I thank him for steadfastly raising this really important issue, particularly during Children's Mental Health Week. I have met the 3 dads walking. They're inspirational. Their courage is extraordinary. And as the father of young children, I don't know how they're able to campaign in the way that they do. I'm not sure I would be able to do so. So, of course, I can assure him that I will meet them again and push this agenda, really important agenda, forward.
Yasmin Qureshi.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. 86% of trains at Kersley Station in my constituency were delayed or cancelled in the past 12 weeks, and this is widespread throughout the Bolton South and Walkden. My constituent Sophie, who commutes from Walkden to Manchester, recently told me almost every day at least one peak time train is cancelled, and when the train finally turns up, it's overcrowded. Recently, she was stranded for hours after constant cancellations because the train crew were unavailable. Can the Prime Minister ensure my constituents that this government is committed to building reliable railways after 14 years of Tory chaos?
Well, my honourable friend is right to highlight that the party opposite left our railways in a terrible state. 2 years of strikes costing our economy £850 million in lost revenue. You can't grow the economy if you can't run the railways. We will launch Great British Railways to focus relentlessly on passengers and to clamp down on delays and cancellation. And I'm pleased, Mr Speaker, that Northern have announced the largest ever investment in its fleet to deliver 450 new trains, meaning more comfortable, reliable journeys for her constituents.
Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch.
Mr Speaker, when Labour negotiates, our country loses. Yesterday, we heard the government offered £18 billion for Mauritius to take our territory in the Chagos Islands. This is money that belongs to our children and their children. This is an immoral surrender, so North London lawyers can boast at their dinner parties. Mr Speaker, when Labour negotiates, we all lose. Sometimes they don't even bother. Why did the Energy Secretary withdraw government lawyers from defending the case against the eco-nutters who want to obstruct Rosebank's oil and gas fields?
Mr Speaker, let me deal with the serious issue she raises in relation to the Chagos case. This is a military base that is vital to our national security and to national security. A number of years ago, the legal certainty of that base was thrown into doubt. And let me, Mr. Speaker, let me be clear, and I'll pick my words carefully. Without legal certainty, the base cannot operate in practical terms as it should. That is bad for our national security, and it's a gift to our adversaries. Now, some within the party opposite know exactly what I'm talking about. That is why, Mr. Speaker, that is why the last government started negotiations about sovereignty and about securing the long-term use of the base. Mr. Speaker, they were right to do so. That's why the last government conducted 11 of the 13 rounds of those negotiations. And, Mr. Speaker, they were right to do so. That is why this government has completed that process, and we were right to do so. Mr. Speaker, I will set out the details when they're finalised, and it will, of course, be presented to Parliament. But if the Leader of the Opposition is properly briefed on the national security implications when she's asking these questions, which she's perfectly entitled to do, then she knows exactly what I'm talking about in terms of national security and legal certainty. If, on the other hand, she's not properly briefed on the national security implications, she's not doing her job, she's not concerned about national security, and she's not fit to be Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, how can anyone believe that this man is defending UK interests when he bends the knee to anyone who asks him? His answer was so weak and so waffly, it is no wonder he needs a voice coach. But he didn't answer the question I asked him, why the Energy Secretary was not defending our country. The Energy and Environment Secretaries received nearly £400,000 worth of donations from Lisbeth Rousing. It's her money behind the court case that will stop an £8 billion investment, threaten thousands of jobs, and endanger energy security for all of us. Did the Energy Secretary refuse to defend UK interests because he's funded by billionaire eco-zealots?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'll come to that very issue, but I noticed she didn't say she was briefed about the Chagos issue. This is important. Mr. Speaker, when she became Leader of the Opposition, I said to her that I would give her a briefing on any national security issue if she asked for it. That's very important to the way that we run our democracy. She has not asked for a briefing on the Chagos case. And that's because she's more interested in chasing reform than in national security. In relation to oil and gas, it'll be part of our energy supply for many years to come. We've been absolutely clear about that. But we are going through a transition. It's important because that transition to renewable energy will give us lower bills, energy security, take Putin's foot off our throat, and it's good for the national interest.
Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, this is a weak answer because he doesn't know what is going on. Last week, I asked about the employment bill. He didn't know what was going on. We asked about the education bill. He didn't know what was going on. Let me tell him what is going on. Maybe he can answer some questions. Shell has said a one-year delay to Rosebank will cost £350 million and the loss of 1,000 jobs. Equinor has said a two-year delay to Jackdaw will cost £800 million. The only benefit I can see is the £400,000 to Labour ministers. At a time of war in Europe, threatened energy security, increased competition from the US and elsewhere, we should be getting British oil and gas out of the ground. Does the Prime Minister have the guts to take on Labour donors and his Energy Secretary and approve the licence applications when they are resubmitted?
Prime Minister.
Speaker, she doesn't even want to know what's going on, otherwise she'd have asked for the relevant briefing. She knows the position on Rosebank. She knows the court case that has meant that the licence has got to be reviewed. There's a process that's got to be gone through in the proper way. She understands that, but yet again she's proving all she can do is student politics and playing party politics.
Mr. Speaker, I am speaking on behalf of the people of this country. When Labour negotiates, our country loses. When Labour negotiates, our country loses. He's talking about bringing growth and investment. Last week, he lost a £450 million investment from AstraZeneca that we negotiated, Mr. Speaker, and which would have delivered growth immediately. That same day, he also lost the £8 billion oil field investment that would have delivered next year. Business is abandoning the North Sea because of his decisions. What signal does he think he is sending to investors?
As she knows, AstraZeneca was a commercial decision. She must understand that. But, Mr. Speaker, all she does is come here every week, carping from the sidelines, talking our country down. We've got the highest investment for 19 years. PwC say the second best place to invest in the world. The IMF has upgraded growth. Wages are up. Inflation is down. There's more to do. Reforming planning and regulation. Building new homes. Supporting a runway, the third runway at Heathrow. What unites these? Championed by Labour, opposed by the Tories.
Mr. Speaker, it's so hard to believe anything he says. This is a man who needed emergency voice coaching on Christmas Eve. This government is so clueless. It is borrowing £8 billion. It is so clueless. It is borrowing £8 billion for GB Energy, a vanity project that is not great, not British, and does not produce any energy. Its own chairman, Mr. Speaker, admitted it will take 20 years to create just 1,000 jobs. Meanwhile, 200,000 jobs are at stake in our oil and gas sector right now. Does he think that 1,000 jobs in 20 years' time are worth more than the 200,000 jobs we have now?
Prime Minister.
Again, she clearly hasn't been briefed or doesn't want to be briefed. GB Energy, a publicly owned energy company that will drive the move to renewables. That is not about the number of jobs in HQ. It's about the thousands upon thousands of jobs they will generate to give us energy security, something we didn't have under the last government, take Putin's boot off our throat, something we didn't have under the last government. They lost control of the economy. We're getting it back.
He can waffle as long as he likes, Mr. Speaker. But we know that Labour promised to bring energy bills down by £300. Instead, bills are going up. He's freezing pensioners while shoveling money to Mauritius. The Prime Minister isn't just managing decline, Mr. Speaker. He is creating decline. He has the power to grant these licences, open these oil and gas fields, save British jobs, and bring down bills. Why does he find it so hard to do the right thing?
Right.
She really needs to look into how these licences are granted. Well, I appreciate that their reset seems to be having no policies apart from cutting pensions and having no briefings on relevant issues. Let's just remind ourselves, they presided over the biggest drop in living standards on record. Mortgages went through the roof and they left a £22 billion black hole. And we learned last weekend, Mr. Speaker, that under the last government, £35 billion was lost on benefit fraud and error. Who was at the Treasury at the time, you might ask, Mr. Speaker? The Shadow Business Secretary and the Leader of the Opposition. They want to give lectures. No thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member for Clacton says that his party is, and I quote, open to anything when it comes to changing our NHS and open to an insurance-based system. So can my right honourable friend confirm that under a Labour government, the NHS will be there for everyone when they need it, not having to worry about the bill?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the NHS is the lifeblood of our country, and that's why we invested £25 billion at the budget, a record amount, and we're making it fit for the future through our plan for change. What a contrast with Reform, whose leader has said that those who can afford to pay should pay for our health care. Under Labour, the NHS will always be free at the point of use for anyone who needs it.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with the remarks of the Prime Minister about the terrible murder of the 15-year-old in Sheffield and say that we will support any effective action against knife crime that the government proposes? At his first Prime Minister's questions, I told the Prime Minister about my constituent Andrea. A full-time carer for her mother, Andrea is one of thousands of carers caught up in the carers' allowance scandal, hounded by the DWP for repayments. The Prime Minister accepted there was a problem and set up an independent review, and we welcomed that. But 2 months after the announcement of the review, Andrea received a letter summoning her to a tribunal next week. Her mother's health has been deteriorating. She's had to go in a care home. This is the last thing Andrea needs. So will the Prime Minister step in and do the right thing and cancel Andrea's tribunal and all proceedings against carers like Andrea, at least until the review is concluded?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we set up the independent review, and I know he welcomes that and it was the right thing to do. I don't know the details of Andrea's case, but I will certainly, if he provides them to me, make sure that we have the details and look into what's happened in her particular case.
Sir Ed Davey.
I'm grateful for that reply. The Secretary of State for DWP wrote to me and wasn't interested in engaging, so I hope the Prime Minister will. Mr. Speaker, turning to foreign policy now, last night many of us were alarmed to hear President Trump speak about forcibly displacing 1.8 million people from Gaza. The Prime Minister has spoken to the President on several occasions now. Does he personally believe that Trump recognises the dangers of statements like this to the fragile ceasefire in Gaza, and indeed to the security of both Palestinians and Israelis? I'm glad that the Foreign Secretary has confirmed that the government's position is still a two-state solution. I think that has support on all sides of the House. But will he reassure the House that this position and our concerns on these dangerous statements from the President will be communicated to the White House directly and firmly?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, you raised a very important issue. The most important issue on the ceasefire is obviously it's sustained. We see it through the phases, and that means that the remaining hostages come out and the aid that's desperately needed gets into Gaza at speed and at the volumes that are needed. I have, from the last few weeks, two images fixed in my mind. The first is the image of Emily Damari reunited with her mother, which I found extremely moving. The second was the image of thousands of Palestinians walking, literally walking through the rubble to try to find their homes and their communities in Gaza. They must be allowed home. They must be allowed to rebuild, and we should be with them in that rebuild on the way to a two-state solution.
Patricia Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The announcement of a third runway at Heathrow is obviously a massive boost to growth in the economy. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that it is important that the economic boost is spread around the UK? And will he therefore agree to ask the relevant minister to meet with me and other Glasgow MPs and with the Chamber of Commerce to discuss the possibility of a new supply chain hub being created in the city where materials for Heathrow's expansion could be reassembled?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, she's right. The new runway at Heathrow can boost economic growth across the whole of the country. It would boost the economy by billions and create over 100,000 jobs across the UK, with 60% of the economic benefits outside London and the South East. It is, Mr. Speaker, good for Scottish passengers and Scottish businesses, particularly Scottish salmon, which is the #1 export passing through Heathrow, worth £970 million over the last 5 years. I'll obviously happily make sure that she gets a meeting with the relevant minister.
Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I can assure the honourable member for Rugby that Reform want healthcare to be free at the point of delivery. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. There appears to be some panic on that side of the House. I'm not surprised. to ask the Prime Minister, I'd like some advice, please. What do I say? Oh, they really are panicking, aren't they?
Order. I want to get this question over with. All you're doing is ensuring it goes on forever. Quick question.
To ask the Prime Minister for some advice, what do I say to 25,000 constituents in Clacton, including...
Either get on... No, you've got it. No, we're not both standing at the centre. Look, I need a quick question, then I can get you the answer. Come on.
What do I say, Prime Minister, to 25,000 constituents in Clacton, including 99-year-old Jim O'Dwyer, who flew a full set of missions on Lancaster bombers as tail end Charlie, as they're losing their winter fuel allowance, feeling the pinch, whilst at the same time we're prepared to give away a military base and pay £18 billion for the privilege of doing so.
Mr. Speaker, he talks of panic. The only panic is people using the NHS who know that under his policy he wants to charge them for using the NHS. And what he should say to the people of Clacton when he finally finds Clacton is that they should vote Labour because we're stabilising the economy and boosting the Dems.
Mr. Speaker, Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many of my constituents in Folkestone and Hythe are expressing their frustration at the previous Tory government net migration figures, which quadrupled, increasing by nearly 1 million. But unbelievably, the Shadow Foreign Secretary has admitted that her party is proud of their open borders experiment on Britain. So will the Prime Minister explain what he is doing to bring these numbers back under control?
Well, I'm grateful to him for raising this because we know that the Leader of the Opposition personally lobbied to remove annual limits on student and work visas. The Shadow Foreign Secretary still thinks they got a great record on immigration, forgetting that they quadrupled immigration, reaching almost 1 million a year. Our Borders Bill will give stronger powers than ever to tackle people smugglers. We've already removed 16,000 people with no right to be here. The question for the opposition is, will they walk into the lobby with us next week to secure our borders?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After she was kidnapped and shot, Emily Damari was held in captivity by Hamas in UNRWA facilities, confirming many of our fears that UNRWA is riddled with Hamas sympathisers. So, the British people do not want our aid being stolen by Hamas. So will the Prime Minister agree with me that we should stop funding Hamas, follow the example of other nations and divert our aid to other, more trustworthy agencies?
Prime Minister.
On the question of Emily Damari, I've spoken with Mandy on many occasions, including when she didn't know whether her daughter was alive or not. And just listening to her was to really understand the torture that she went through. I spoke just the other day to Emily herself about the conditions in which she was held, and of course will continue to do so. But to be absolutely clear, and he knows this, we're not funding Hamas. Never will we condemn Hamas, and everybody in this House should condemn Hamas.
Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 54,000 women a year lose their jobs when they are pregnant or on maternity leave. 1 in 10 HR managers say they would be reluctant to hire a woman whom they thought was might start a family. Law has not solved this. Will the Prime Minister please meet with me, Dad Shift and Pregnant Then Screwed to discuss the ring-fence paid paternity leave that is needed to bring about change?
Prime Minister.
She raised a very important issue in relation to maternity pay and maternity leave. The Leader of the Opposition thinks that maternity pay is excessive, and that's the difference. We know that workers' rights are pro-growth, and I'm proud that our Employment Rights Bill will introduce parental leave from day one. which means 1.5 million more employees will be entitled to unpaid parental leave and 30,000 more fathers to paternity leave. I'm happy to ensure that she gets the meeting with the relevant minister.
Gagan Mahindra.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know that, like everyone in the House, the Prime Minister is an honourable member. On that basis, can he repeat his assurances that all rules were followed while the country was in Tier 4 lockdown in December 2020, not just by him, but as his team as well, but also his voice coach, Leona Mellinger?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, in December 2020, I was in my office working on the expected Brexit deal. With my team, we had to analyse the deal as it came in at speed, prepare and deliver a live statement at speed on one of the most important issues for our country in recent years. That's what I was doing. What were they doing? Suitcases of booze into Downing Street, partying and fighting, vomiting up the walls, leaving the cleaners to remove red wine stains. That's the difference. I was working, they were partying.
Louise.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know the whole House will support the Prime Minister's comments and send our thoughts to the family and all those who loved Harvey Wilbus after his tragic and senseless death on Monday. I support the government's actions to tackle the sale of certain knives online. But before national media attention moves on from yet another tragic death of a young person, I know the Prime Minister will agree with me that in order to tackle the scale of the crisis engulfing too many of our communities, we need a whole system, cross-government approach to tackle the root causes of violence. Will he commit his government to tackling such a national strategy?
Prime Minister.
This incident was horrific and senseless, and I thank her for raising it. I think the thoughts of the whole House are with the victims' family, friends, and the school community and the wider community who've been impacted by this. We're all grateful to the first responders, the police officers and the medical staff who attended the scene, and it's right that South Yorkshire Police are given the time and space to carry out their investigation. We do need to do everything we can to bear down on knife crime. It is too easy to get knives online. It's too easy to carry knives without proper consequences, and that's why we've made it an absolute priority in government, and I hope it's a cross-party issue to absolutely bear down on knife crime.
James McCreary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know the Prime Minister will share my deep concern that families in my constituency of Lewis, particularly those with disabled children, face agonising waits for essential adaptations to council housing. In my inbox, I have cases where delays have left people unable to use a bathroom or even access a kitchen to simply make a cup of tea. Will the Prime Minister meet with me to discuss how we can ensure councils have the funding they need urgently to build and retrofit homes to ensure that all children have the start in life they deserve?
Minister.
Can I thank him for raising this really important issue for his constituents and actually so many constituents. I'm pleased to confirm that we've put down £69 billion for councils. That's a 6.8% cash terms increase, including up to £3.7 billion in vital additional funding for social care. We've doubled the funding for the Disabled Facilities Grant, an additional £86 million, to allow 7,800 more disabled and elderly people to make improvements that enable more independent lives, and will continue to do so, working across the House.
Rudd Snell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, 83 proud pottery workers woke up on Monday morning with no job following the collapse of the 200-year-old Royal Stafford pottery firm. It is a crisis in our ceramics industry. Escalating prices for energy and fake and foreign imports is causing a real problem. So could I ask the Prime Minister if he, through his offices, can arrange for the energy companies to meet with Ceramics UK and the GMB as the voice of the workforce so we can hammer out a new deal? And can he promote, through public procurement, buying British so that proud manufacturing jobs in Stoke can be protected?
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to him for raising this really important issue, and it is obviously a question of jobs, but it's also a question of identity and a sense of place. And of course, we'll work with the energy companies, and of course, we'll have the relevant meetings as he suggests.
Colin Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Agnes lives in my Bicester and Woodstock constituency. In 2019, when she was 9, she was referred by her GP to Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services, CAMS. Agnes has had to wait over 9 years for an assessment for the neurodiversity that has caused her crushing mental health problems. Last year, when Agnes's dad, Jim, sought to accelerate her appointment, he was told that CAMS could not see her or prioritise her appointment, and I quote, unless Agnes is actively trying to kill herself. Jim asked me to raise this case today because he wants to ensure that no other child goes through the same experience as his daughter. Will the Prime Minister meet with Agnes, Jim and me to hear their story?
Minister.
Can I thank him for raising this issue in that way and pass on to Agnes and Jim just how impactful what he has said is and how important it is that he continues to raise this issue, because far too many children and young people are waiting far too long to receive the mental health support that they need, and we're determined to ensure more children and young people can access high-quality mental health support in a timely manner. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Please.
Llandudno is a beautiful seaside town and wonderful place to visit, but businesses are struggling with the rise in shoplifting. In many cases, thieves are stealing a full view of staff because they just don't fear the consequences. The recent funding boost for neighbourhood policing is very welcome, but could the Prime Minister please tell my constituents what more this government is doing to tackle retail crime and deter repeat offenders?
Prime Minister.
Well, for far too long, crimes like shoplifting have been written off as low level. That's wrong, it's devastating, and the party opposite left us with rising crime and effectively told the police to ignore shoplifting under £200 worth of goods. We've got rid of that shoplifters charter and working hard to make sure that we take a grip where they lost control.
William.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Following my right honourable friend, the member for Kingston and Surbiton, I wanted to raise an equally troubling case. My constituent retired from the police force to care for his wife, working a part-time job to help pay the bills. As his earnings were not consistent, there were times he was above the carer's allowance threshold, causing later payments to be withheld. He's now owed thousands of pounds, and recently he's been diagnosed with grade 4 glioblastoma, which has made the situation even more serious. Will the Prime Minister agree to look at this situation and ensure the Department for Work and Pensions supports rather than penalises carers?
Prime Minister.
Again, we've obviously set up the independent review into exactly what happened in these cases, which was the right thing to do. We will look at individual circumstances. So again, if she's willing to pass the details to me, we'll look at them.
Joanna Baxter.
Mr. Speaker, Audit Scotland recently exposed the incredible funding crisis facing our councils in Scotland. £759 million of a funding gap. They also reported that the 12 councils that make up the Strathclyde Pension Fund are reducing their employer contributions from 19.3% to 6.5%. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that instead of taking money out of workers' pensions, that the Scottish Government appropriately fund our councils?
She's absolutely right to point out the failure of the government in Scotland. They don't want to talk about that failure. They've got the powers, they've got the resources, they just haven't got any excuses left.
Close question. Yep.
The honourable member asks about visiting Scotland. As he knows, my first visit as a Prime Minister, within days of becoming Prime Minister, was to Scotland, where I met the First Minister. I've also been for the meeting of the Council of Regions and Nations in October, Interpol General Assembly in November, the British Irish Council in Edinburgh in December, and look forward to going again very soon.
Dave Duggan.
Interesting, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister couldn't tell me when he was going to be coming to Scotland next. But does he agree with the withering assessment of the eminent politics professor Sir John Curtis, who says the current UK Prime Minister is the worst thing to happen to Anas Sarwar? And if he doesn't, and he should, does he think it's stripping Scottish pensioners of their winter fuel payment, or abandoning workers in Grangemouth, or attacking the national insurance payments of farmers? does he believe that that is what's catastrophically torpedoed Labour in the polls in Scotland? So when he does get a date, he can even bring his Chancellor with him to back him up on the numbers, assuming she's still the Chancellor by then.
I remember when that rhetoric used to come from them sitting down here.
Order. Mr. Dugan, I want... Order. Mr. Dugan, I want no more. Prime Minister.
He has to shout, Mr. Speaker, because they're so far up there, so few of them, that they can't get heard without shouting.
He needs to be kicked out. My constituent Matthew and his mum Catherine, alongside Emma Murphy and Janet Williams, have campaigned for many years to get compensation for families affected by the epilepsy drug sodium valproate. 12 months on from the Patient Safety Commissioner's report on this matter, those harmed are still waiting for the recommendations to be implemented. So can I ask the Prime Minister how much longer individuals and families impacted by valproate will need to wait for the clarity they seek? And will the Prime Minister arrange for the Health Minister to meet with valproate campaigners to discuss this important matter?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is obviously a really important matter. I understand the Minister for Patient Safety did meet patient groups before Christmas to hear their stories and their accounts and experiences firsthand. And we will provide an update on the Patient Safety Commissioner's report at the earliest opportunity to the House.
Saoirse Eastwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We all know how the song goes. You got to know when to hold them, when to fold them, when to walk away and when to run. And we've done all of them in Northern Ireland because the system of government that we have is a gamble. Well, I'm not prepared to roll the dice on the people of Lagan Valley who have already been without government 40% of the time. The Secretary of State for Northern Ireland says he wants to stop the cycles of collapse. So do I. But don't then turn around and tell us in Northern Ireland that we can't deliver public service transformation if no steps are taken to stop the collapse. The people of Northern Ireland who I represent, nationalist, unionist and unaligned like myself, are all out of aces. Our public services are on the floor. Will this government be the one to step up to the plate, reform the institutions, end the veto and stop rolling the dice on the people of Northern Ireland?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, since 1998, the Good Friday Agreement has delivered a far more peaceful society in Northern Ireland, and that is really important. Restoration of the power sharing was a significant milestone and allows the institutions to make progress on the most important issues to the people of Northern Ireland, and will continue to work with all parties to that end.
Jill Furness.
I was delighted to recently visit Chaucer School, a great school in my constituency with fantastic young people and innovative and motivated teaching staff. But 14 years of Tory government did not do enough for more than 300,000 children across the country attending schools that are stuck and kept receiving poor Ofsted judgments. Will the Prime Minister set out how this government will tackle inequality and tear down barriers to opportunity through our plan for change?
Mr. Speaker, the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill will ensure that all schools can innovate, new teachers are qualified, and every child receives a consistent core education to set them up for success in life.
Dr. Danny Chambers.
Mr. Speaker, 5 months ago, the Care Quality Commission reported that 2/3 of maternity units in England were unsafe. And years of unsafe staffing levels have resulted in the NHS paying an astonishing £1.15 billion a year in compensation due to avoidable injuries caused during childbirth and sometimes deaths. The previous Conservative government have allowed maternity services to deteriorate to the point where many consider it to be a public health crisis. Will the Prime Minister commit to improving maternity care and women's health services as a top priority so our maternity unit in Winchester and those around the rest of the country are the safest places in the world for women to give birth?
I thank him for raising this important issue. Women and babies deserve the highest standards of care through pregnancy, birth and the months that follow. We're committed to recruiting thousands of new midwives for the NHS whilst providing support to trusts failing on maternity care. Mr. Speaker, we're working with the NHS as it delivers a 3-year maternity plan, which is making good progress in improving services, including for his constituents.
Final question, Michael Wheeler.
Mr. Speaker. Last week I had the opportunity to visit two of the local job centres that serve my constituency of Worsley and Eccles. The dedication of the staff I met to helping our local community, supporting people into work and adapting to the area's needs was inspiring. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that we must listen to their frontline experiences as we look to remove the barriers to work that keep people locked out of jobs? And will he visit these teams with me to see the work they do?
Well, I thank you for his question. Our Get Britain Working White paper sets out the biggest reforms to employment support in a generation, backed by £240 million of investment. And through our plan for change, we'll boost living standards, more secure, rewarding jobs to make work pay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
That completes Prime Minister's questions. No.